nuts and bolts about this meeting is that it's very important for us to learn as much as we can about what the Finnish American dances were, what happened, where, a lot of questions we've already generated about the dances. Both to inform the program, but more than that, to what we've done for earlier celebrations is to create these programs for the live event. We summarize, have photos, 4 pages of photos around the music, and with theater we had some descriptions and names of performers and things like that. Hey. Oh, there's Susie, I was just saying, you didn't make it. Hey, how are you? Good. We just started, so some coffee and donuts over there. I just started Susie, because Susie, loosely the team that's putting this event on is Rob, myself, Susie, Maddie, and Sarah Slicker-Swift, who has a dance studio and great dancer and also teaches kids. So the 4 of us are sort of, as we turn past Labor Day, we're rapidly going to have to pull this program together. So I described that this would be a dance, maybe kids, instructions, having all a great time, but specifically, Rob and I have collaborated on the earlier cultural events like music and theater in particular, where it becomes a target for us to do a lot of archival research and talk to lots of people so that we learn as much as we can about like music in the Finnish American community or theater. And then we have a written program that I've done it twice, an essay up front, which sort of tries to capture the spirit of what we learned of what was happening here in that cultural arena. We had 4 pages of photos in the music program, and then the program can also have some sort of descriptions of the dances and whatever. So we don't have too much time, but we really appreciate your coming because we're at this stage now of, which we have been with the earlier events, of looking back to this very fuzzy history, and try to have a process by which we get it more and more and more clear, and then can take some of what's come forward and put into this written program. And the value of the program is it becomes in your house or in city archives. Ultimately, it becomes the historic record of what we have learned about, especially in the 20s and 30s, and then now we know for dance up into the 40s and 50s.
Turn it on. I can hear you.
Okay. So it's for the purposes of having the best possible program written for that event that has the opportunity to present the detail, to go from that fuzzy, oh, they danced, into having an understanding of what those dances were like, which halls, which generations, only Finns, did they wear costumes, did it follow a program or freestanding, how often? You can imagine all kinds of details that we're hoping to get into some kind of focus. And the history of that up through, as we're saying, I think 50s and 60s, when you could still see some of that dancing happening. So as far as this meeting, I think we're really delighted at all of you and the range of you who showed up. We don't really have an agenda, I'd say, Rob, which is as much as can we start to share both the stories and memories that we have individually with each other, and also the kinds of photographs, or as I said, that my mother's costume is over there. So what could we show on October 22nd? What could we have a photograph of? And what is the story? How do we get to being able to have a story? And one real reinforcement for having this meeting is when I talked to Betty a week ago, and she explains that one of the photos we've started to use, she's in there, and it's at the Bayview Brotherhood Club, and we didn't know any of that, so it's just like collectively a lot more about this history of Finnish American dance that you may not even know how much you know. If you just, like Nancy, we talked about that, your stories, you may know more than you think you know. So
Possibly.
yeah, and then also how fun it would be to just kind of collectively have another gathering to share. You can hear from Betty and vice versa. And so we'll see by the end if we've gotten some direction on either answers or where we should go to look for more information, more photos, more programs, more, and possibly at the event or around that, some actual interviews with some people, maybe in their 90s now or something, who could become part of Sarah Slifer Swift's documentary on ethnic dance traditions. We'll have a bit of a segment in there about that event and some interviews and context for what Finnish American dances were. And by the way, she's looking at Brazilians and Portuguese and whatnot, and is definitely from the very beginning said, in her view, the strongest ethnic tradition of dance, hands down, was the Finnish American dances. And so many of Finns also went in to be major musicians in the bands that played at dances all around the Cape. So I don't know, I might suggest that we just try to go around one by one, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I had a thought, and that is, when we see the Finnish dances, we think of, dances for a purpose at the hall, festival, summer festival, and things like that. But how many of you learned any Finnish dances over time? One. Okay.
I know the Scottish.
Okay, yeah. How many of you have gone to weddings over the years? When it's a Finnish person, or one or both, they did some Finn dancing for the old timers. Just one person. Okay, that's amazing. Susie, do you want to talk about that?
I remember, Nancy, you were probably there too. I think it was when Eric and Ellen Natty got married down at 1142 Washington Street. And there was music, and there's a picture of Aunt Teddy and Uncle Betty whirling around doing the Finn hop. I was thinking as Val was speaking that I'm curious about where the dance appeared, how often it was in organized sort of groups, like to keep it going or just to get together officially, and how much of it was there ever spontaneous dancing, and how much of it was just at people's homes, and that's where I encountered it, at people's homes. Down at the Demetrius's house, I actually don't remember being part of anything there, but I remember my parents talking about dancing going on with Finnish dancing, Greek dancing, I think even Russian dancing. And then at the Manship's house, there would be summer parties, and the music would come out, and there would be dancing. So that was how I encountered it. And my father taught me the Finn hop, and I remember dancing the polka with him down at Manship's property, probably when I was 8, and he was going so fast, and I was so small that my feet never touched the ground. It was really great, and so that's what I remember about it. And there was another dance I was saying to Nikki, right, on the way in, called the ratikon or the ratiko. I'm not quite sure how to spell it. I know there's 2 ways in it somewhere, which I used to love. It was really, and I think it was a dance specifically for that one piece of music. Where you do sort of like the heel toe, heel toe, heel toe, heel toe, and then the music speeds up, and you do like a Virginia reel move where you're holding hands, and you go sashay down and sashay back up. I really loved that dance. So for me, all the encounters were at people's homes. Great.
Could I just ask you, maybe you know this answer too, that I have heard the Finn hop. Was that the Scottish? What was which of the dances that have, like, there's Scottish, there's polka, there's Humbo is the name of a dance that I knew. So what was the Finn hop?
I think it was a Scottish. I heard from my mother that it was a Scottish, and I just always knew it as the Finn hop.
That's important. So it was, is that what we think? It was the Scottish? Yeah.
I just have a little tidbit. One time, a wedding reception that I went to was at the Rockport Country Club, and it was the wedding of Jane Hyrie and Jane Humlin Hyrie and Buddy Hyrie, and all of a sudden, people were dancing Finn dances, and it seemed so strange to a young kid, you know, to see that. And now that I say that, it maybe I was not a young kid. I was older, but it still seemed interesting to see the old timers in those days do that with gusto, and it was also a nice way of including, you know, the old timers too in dances they knew, and so that's why I asked about weddings or any kind of occasion where the Finn dances might have been brought out. What about your parents? Did your parents dance? Not necessarily in costumes, but I mean go to a place where they had Finn dances.
I don't really know how to use this.
You just hold it.
Just hold it. Should I introduce myself?
Yes, please.
Okay, my name is Nancy Clamola Natty McKay. Both of my parents are Finnish heritage, and my parents, I remember my mother telling me how they loved to dance. My mother actually played the organ and the piano, and they both loved to dance. Unfortunately, my father passed away in 1951, but I remember her always telling me stories about dances at the Rendezvous in Folly Cove and Waynola Hall. She spent a lot of time at Waynola Hall, or they did. And as Susie is my cousin, and I do remember now being at Eric and Ellen's wedding. I don't specifically remember the dance, but I do remember being there. And also my mother used to talk about, she also went to the Manships and the Demetriuses. I can remember her talking about, you know, being there for parties and dancing and all the fun. And I have a feeling like after my father passed away, possibly she might not have gone because she wasn't a couple. Because I think at that time it was like couples. But anyway, I just know she loved to dance, and so did my father. And there is a photo somewhere. I thought I had it, but I don't think I have. It's a picture of them dancing, but I think they have their costumes on in that photo. So,
What
thank you.
Their names? Your parents' names?
My parents' names? Oh, my father was Laurie Natty, and my mother was Elsie Clamola.
Prominent family.
Both from Lanesville.
Yeah.
By the way, I had an uncle, Laurie, who married an Elsie. Oh, it was so funny when I heard you say that. Yeah, Elsie and Laurie.
Nancy, I have a scan of that photo of your parents. I will send it to you, and I don't know why I have it. You may have loaned me some photos when I scanned it, and so you should have the original. But if you don't, I will get it to you. And they look so great in their costumes. I mean, Rob, when you said they danced with gusto, yeah, they did. It was fun.
So if that was a wet. One of my questions is when like I have my mother's costume over there on the table, and I have no idea on what occasions she wore that costume. I have a feeling that if this was a once a month or once every 2 weeks or something dance, she wouldn't have worn the costume all those times. But were there weddings or special events? That's something I'm really curious to know. So you're saying that at that particular event they were wearing costumes?
Yes, I actually have the costume on the table that I believe is in that photo. I know my mother made it. It's blue and white, and I believe that's the costume that's in the photo that Susie was talking about.
How about stories passed down? Your parents talking about their parents dancing, or depending upon where you were in the Finnish spectrum, maybe parents weren't dancing, but some were. And do you remember any anecdotes of, it's hard for us to believe that our grandparents were dancing, but the fact of the matter is they loved those big festivals. That one clipping I had sent out that 2,000 people had gathered for the festival here, not just Cape Anners, but from all around. Each place would host, and dancing certainly played front and center. So was there anything that came to your ears or were told to you by your parents about dancing in the Finnish community?
My name is Betty Kielinen Erkkila, Erkkila, and my mother was Rachel Jacobson. She was born here in Lanesville, just over in that direction, and she married Matt Kielinen from Pigeon Cove. So they were members of the Cape Ann Finns. The photo, which has appeared on Facebook.
Was it called the Cape Ann Finnish Dancers or Cape Ann Finns?
Kate, I'm not really sure.
Because Rob has set up the Cape Ann Finns. and I'm like, was
Cape
there
Ann
an earlier
Finns, Cape
group
Ann
that-
Finns dances probably.
Yes, probably, yeah.
And that particular picture, I know all the people in the photo except the gentleman. There was a younger fellow, I don't know who he was. But I'm sitting on the sidelines there. The photo was taken at the Bayview Brotherhood, most likely in the late 50s, at a dress rehearsal. And I'm on the sidelines. It's the only time I actually got to see the Cape Ann Finnish dancers. I never saw them because I was in high school and I really wasn't interested in the Finnish dancing, to tell you the truth. So I have a very bored expression on my face. I look very bored, like, oh, please, when is this going to be over?
Remember that photo? She's the one in the back.
I'm the one. And so that's the only time I actually ever saw them dancing. And I do remember when the Cape Ann Finns, they left from Fanny Jacobson's house over there, and they were going to dance at Constitution Hall. So I remember the huge bus coming to pick them up, and they traveled down to Washington to perform at Constitution Hall. I did bring along, which I can show later, I did find in an old beat-up scrapbook of mine, which I had forgotten I had even. It's a photo of my mother and father at a midsummer event at Spyron Hall, probably in the late 50s. And it shows them dancing upstairs of the hall. And I've written on the back. So I was very excited, you know, to see that again. And I put all the information on the back. And then the other thing I found was a picture of Miriam Niami's mother and father at their 40th anniversary, which was celebrated at the Finn Hall on Forest Street in Rockport. And Auntie Niami was, you know, oh my goodness, what a talented guy he was. He was a member of the Wayno band and a gymnast and a humorist, made records, and had a cobbler shop in Pigeon Cove. I never could understand how he could see to do his work. It was always so dark in there. But I also included some information that came from one of our books here. And what's of interest is that Mrs. Niemi was one of the early teachers of the Finnish Cape Ann dance group, of all those dances. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
So you were there when the bus left?
From Fanny's house right over
Oh,
there.
that's
It's
incredible.
interesting what your mind, you know, does store for you. And then during the bicentennial year, there was a lot going on Cape Ann. In fact, I have a booklet. I might have given it to you before, but giving you another booklet of what all the Scandinavians did on Cape Ann, the various events, and one of which was the Midsummer Fest up at the top of, this was in the newspaper also, up at the top of Pigeon Hill. And Håkan Olsson, he was from Sweden, he and his wife, we were members of Spyron Lodge only for like 5 or 6 years, not for a long time, because we just got way too involved down there. And so Håkan Olsson actually did conduct Scandinavian and American dances at the hall. So we did learn a few little steps. So,
If I could interrupt.
sure.
This is a group from Spyron Hall, but on this Johannes Day, they became automatic Finns.
And they
day.
invited anybody, you know, to come with their costume and dance around the maypole, which was up at Pigeon Hill. And then another thing I was telling Rob about, I don't know how this happened, but you know how you suggest something and you can do it? Well, we were new members down at Spyron Lodge at the time, during the bicentennial era there. And they hadn't had an entry for a 4th of July parade for a very long time. So I said, well, gee, you know, it would be great to have something, you know, in the parade in Rockport, maybe, and in Gloucester. And next thing I know, they said, well, would you be able to, you know, lead it? And I couldn't think fast enough, actually. So John and I got involved in it. We were living in Lanesville at the time, and we came up, you know, we created an entry for the parade with one of Mr. Hansen, I guess, wasn't it? That was Dick Josephson. Yeah. And then we had the flag. We had a big truck. Håkan Olsson, the chairman of Spyron at the time, worked for Gloucester Engineering. So we used their truck. Big flat truck. Yeah. And we were hoping to get people to help decorate the truck with greenery. Remember that, John? There was an empty house where we lived in Lanesville. And so John and I pretty much ended up decorating the truck with all the greenery and everything. And so that was a lot of fun. And then we had also a smorgasbord table on the truck. And then also we had uniform, costume-clad dances in the street from the lodge, too. So we did that in Rockport and Gloucester. And that was pretty interesting.
And a lot of rehearsals in our yard.
Yeah, we had a lot of rehearsals in a, driveway in Lanesville at the time.
Yeah.
Do you think
So-
that the 4th of July parade group in Rockport took photos of all and has an
Well,
archive
what
of
I
all
did
that?
was, we have also in the bag made a list of other ideas of where you could get photos. And one of the entries was from Spiron Lodge. We're not members of it now, but because they won, I don't know, some kind of a, what did they win? They won something from the float.
Best in his class.
Could you run down your list a little bit for us? Do you have it?
I have it here, yeah.
Just read a little bit of what you have.
So
Because I think that's part of, if we have some ideas of where to
Well,
look,
yeah,
maybe
so,
some of us would look a little
yeah.
or something, so
Well,
where
that's-
are you thinking that we could go?
Well, there's a whole lot of places.
Yeah, that's
We
what.
have 2 hours. All right, now I'll just read some of them. Well, one is to contact Nancy Urkela Bollinger, the sister to Evelyn Kraybeck. She's out in California now. She was here very briefly, and I only got a chance very briefly, not even to get on this subject with her. But I have her address out in Costa Mesa, and I know I don't know that she has, her mother and father, Sulu and Ellis Urkela, were members of the Cape Ann Fin, so possibly she may have something. And then the other thing is, I've suggested this before, Rosemary Graham Doyle, her parents were members of the Cape Ann Fins, so possibly she may have pictures. Oh, getting back to Spiron Lodge, what I meant to say was that as far as Spiron Lodge pictures of like that parade entry or anything, Herman Lydia is the chairman now, so maybe they have some archival photos hidden away somewhere. And then also at the Sawyer Free Library, there would be pictures from the Gloucester Daily Times. The Gloucester Daily Times recently gifted all of their files to the Cape Ann Museum. John's mother, Barbara Urkela, her photos were gifted to the Cape Ann Museum. And then the Rockwood Art Association, we used to have teen dances there in the 50s. And Sylvester Ahola would come over there and play his trumpet during the intermission. He had Leo Capillo from Pigeon Cove help him out, get set up. So that was a lot of fun. And then Leo was wondering if there were any, photos around from the Rockport Art Association of Sylvester playing in the teen record hops there. And I did write 2-3 years ago to somebody who was the executive director, who's not there any longer, and I didn't get a response, but they have a new executive director, so possibly they may have some photos hidden away. The other thing is, when I was in junior high, I did go with other people, with other young people, to dances at the Finn Hall on Forest Street in Rockport. And when I was in junior high, I did take dance lessons from Flossie Hendrickson, who I believe is a member of the Cape Ann Fins. And so that was around, 53 or 54. So she lives here in Lanesville, and so, maybe she might have some photos too, so those are some ideas. So I had just something
That's great.
I copied out of the books. Flossie Hendrickson taught ballroom dance at the old Finn Hall on Forest Street when I was in junior high. David Tupper was the pianist, and Father Hendrickson, the chaperone. The name of the hall in Finnish was Valonleimu, which translated into Flame of Light. Flossie was a fine teacher with a pleasing persona. As teens, sometimes on Saturday nights, my counterparts and I danced the night away at the hall. Chaperones sat downstairs playing cards, smoking, and drinking coffee. Actually, I don't recall seeing the adult overseers unless we ventured downstairs in the restroom. I think we behaved very well. Bruce Newman recalls a Christmas tree all decorated for the holiday at one of the record hops. So there's a bunch of stuff, and then talks also about the rendezvous. I've never seen pictures of the rendezvous, but my father told me about it, so I have a copy of information about the rendezvous, and it sounded like an idyllic location down there at Folly Cove, and you paid per dance, and they had it in the 1930s, and people came from all over the young people to go dancing down there. And then I did find one time when I was secretary for a brief while of the Andrews Point Association, I had the records there, and they were the people in the Andrews Point Association in the 1930s were very upset about the Roundtable, and they referred it was in the notes, that cheap dance hall.
Oh.
So they hated it. And so they didn't want all that music wafting over, the village of Pigeon Cove at all. So it only lasted a few years. It mysteriously burned in 1939.
Yeah.
I've never seen a picture of it, but maybe somebody has one tucked away in a drawer.
Where was the rendezvous?
With the pier restaurant.
Oh,
Roughly in there, somewhere in there. But it just sounded like a delightful place
Wow,
with the
yeah.
moon coming on the water and
yeah.
the music. And so my father told me about that when I was a teenager, and I've been quite, mesmerized by the whole
Yeah.
subject. And I'd love to see a photo sometime, but maybe somebody will be forthcoming.
Someone's got that one.
I believe in Steve Niemi. When we had the Finnish music on Cape Ann, we had memorabilia and other artifacts of the music back in the day. And Steve put together a 3-ring binder, and we have it, and included our newspaper clippings. And I'm guessing, but I recall that's the place where there was a photo of the rendezvous. So I'll go home. When I go home, I'll see if I can locate it, and I'll put it online. Send it out.
One last thing is, I did have an extra copy, maybe some of you have seen it during the bicentennial year. A lot of different activities were held on Cape Ann, one of which was that Midsummer Fest that I mentioned to you. So there's a lot of interesting information in there. There weren't Finnish dances specifically, but mentioned some Swedish dances.
So in terms of the outdoor dancing, the other site that Rob and I have talked about, Elena, is the birch tree grove next to the cemetery. And I believe our music program photo was outside of the band, and that could well have been where that photo was taken. But does Greg, would he have any detail about what was happening in those festivals at that site outside in the summers? Was there a dance floor that was constructed, do you
I
think?
think so. It was just a platform.
It was a platform, so they would have
We
had
called it a hall in the woods.
a hall?
Hall in the woods.
Oh, I'm sorry, here.
Finished that.
You have- Oh, that's great. Because actually when next fall we're talking about a bus tour, if they got out at the cemetery and looked at some of the Finnish names on the headstones, we could point them to the birch grove and say that was the hall in the woods. Yeah, that's great. Because I get, I think there were these outdoor platforms in the summertime that were used for dancing, which is kind of magical, isn't it?
And they were fun too over in Finland. I was there in 1968 and 69, and all the young people were going to all these outdoor dance places, and there'd be live musicians, and that was really a lot of fun. And of course, what the popular dance over there, I guess it still is today, they called it tango. They didn't say tango, the tango. So that's very nice memory of Finland.
They kept, well, that one of the things that we want to do next year is, Rob and I were talking about this yesterday, is that we have these common ancestors from the late 1800s and the 1900s, and then the ones who stayed, they have life in Finland and their culture and politics and all of that. They went on to that, and we, with these common, we Finnish American descendants, we've gone on to what happened to us and our culture and all that. So they kept the outdoor dances in Finland, but I don't know if we have. Really, we don't have dance platforms, open air dancing in the summer. So, yeah. Susie.
I was just going to say, I probably might have submitted it, or somebody else might have. It was a newspaper article, I believe, and it had a picture of that hall well, I don't think you can see the dance floor, but it was a celebration, a summer celebration in that area of Hall in the Woods.
So you gave it last year or something?
Well, I think I probably gave it to somebody. I'm quite sure I did, but I'll look for it at home. I know it was an article about.
Oh, that would be great.
It says a festival, but I'm not sure if it actually shows dancing, but it shows that area.
I think we're beginning to piece together an image in the program
Yeah.
with some pages of photos, and that would be one along with dances and costumes and things like that, yeah.
I was glad to be reminded about the outside part because I realized anytime I've ever danced Finn dancing, it's been outside. And my cousin Deanie and I went to Finland in 2014, and it was at Juhannus, and there was a big celebration out on Seurasaari. And at midnight, there was this enormous dance on this enormous platform, and everybody was whirling around. It was absolutely fantastic. And the other thing I wanted, there were two other things I wanted to add. I forgot that at my wedding, there was Finn dancing.
Thank you.
Yeah. And nobody really knew how to do it. There's been Finn dancing at all of our family reunions, and every time we try to, teach it again. Planning another reunion next summer, so we got another chance to have a go at it. And the other thing was, I'm so glad that you mentioned the lanes, because Miriam Lane was so important in music. And I mean, at our family reunions, she was there playing the accordion with our Uncle Billy. At the Eric and Ellen Natty wedding down at 1142 Washington Street, she was there making music. It's a great photo of our Aunt Sima, Uncle Jimmo, Robert, all gathered around a music stand with Miriam playing, and they're all singing Finn songs.
By the way, I do remember the carryover of what you were saying on Pigeon Hill is that, so my daughter is now 39. so when she was on the younger side, when I would be taking her places, we definitely went to that hill and saw the maypole and the dancing and had the food and all that sort of stuff. So that history continued. I don't know. Do you remember, Elena? Nancy? When that?
When I first joined Spiron, I don't remember, it was before when I first joined Spiron Lodge, it was before 1995, shortly before that, and I know we were still having, they were having the Midsummer at the top of Pigeon Hill, still at that time, and I know there must have been dancers, and I mean, I'm not a dancer at all, so, but I mean, I was working at the food table, but I know there was dancing and music and whatever at that time still there.
That might have been the last sort of expression of the dance, in a way, those summer events. Other than like what you said, the last formal thing, and then the families have continued spontaneously or not, but as far as an organized dance.
I actually have a photo of, it's at, sorry. I didn't bring it because it isn't an old photo, but myself and Marianne Signal, who was from Finland and lived here for many years and now has, moved back to Finland, but it's at Millbrook Meadow, where we then started having the Spiron Midsummer, and I have a picture of Marianne and myself whirling around dancing.
Yeah, Marianne might be a really good person to contact.
Definitely.
I have contact information for her.
Marianne Signell is a Cape Ann Finn. Marianne is one of 3 in Finland who are Cape Ann Finns. One thing that I've been listening to all the commentary is, number one, I made the connection for the first time ever that the Finns brought those platforms from Finland. And the whole concept wasn't new, what are we going to do here? But they were just building their culture right here. They took it with them. And of course, we always say the love of nature is in the DNA. Now that Hall in the Woods, do all of you have an idea where that is? Okay. Good. And I remember walking on that pathway off Coggeshall Road, and then there would be this big clearing. And I'd say, I wonder what this is all about. Why is it this way? And all of a sudden back into the woods again. And then eventually, I found out about the dance platform there. Now, I thought it was called the Langsford Woods. Did that name come later?
That might have been the other locals. I think the Finns called it something like Hallinmetsä or something like that.
Okay. You
The
wanna-
Hall in the Woods.
Yeah. Can you send that, the rugged spelling, but I can find it out. You have to say who you are.
Oh, right. Elena Pistoma Brink.
Thank you.
So, in terms of going farther back in time, because I think it's interesting, either we actually have memories of the 50s and 60s. That's pretty good, although I'd love to learn more about the Smithsonian Hall thing, the Constitution Hall thing. But
I have a couple of other photos too that you might. Okay. It's on the left,
Oh my God.
Mary Niemi and Miriam Niemi, and they were extraordinary accordionists. They performed all over the country, in this country, and they went over to Finland as well. And I did mention, it was mentioned in our book about how they performed at Gloucester City Hall and for one of Franklin Roosevelt's visits, evidently, when he was, you have my glasses again, running for, she wasn't quite sure which time he was running for president, but performed for them. And they performed for all sorts of, when Franklin Roosevelt was campaigning for president, they played at a political rally at Gloucester City Hall. And then other, well-known people at the time, Rudy Valley, Gracie Fields, Vincent Price. And Walter Winchell alluded to Miriam and Mary in his newspaper column. Mary died at a young age and Miriam lived for quite a long time. So that came from the Miriam Lane collection. It was loaned by, what's her name?
Moral.
Yeah, Mary Jane Morrill. Yeah, she contributed that to the book.
I think that photo is in our music program, as I recall.
Yeah.
But we didn't learn all the other background.
And then they also played one time, the two sisters too, when I read, I think, in Miriam Lane's account in Roger Martin's book or something, that when John Kennedy was running for senator, he was down in Gloucester, and they performed for him, and his wife Jackie was here too. And then
So the Gloucester House has a big photo up. That event, I don't know if you remember that detail, but there are photos that he and Jackie running for office were at the Gloucester House for an event.
That's
I wonder if that's where that happened.
And then this was in 1970, Sylvester Ahola and Miriam played at our wedding reception. And they played a few Finnish numbers, since John and I were both Finnish.
Did anyone dance?
No, I don't think anybody danced that way.
Did you have dancing? Yeah.
No, there wasn't really dancing,
Okay.
but okay, that's about it.
So thank you. What I wanted to try to do is to go back. It would be more. Well, my mother would have danced at all of these in the 1930s. But back, let's say, before World War II, and what were the dances like? I think one thing we've learned here is that the Finn Halls, even like in Rockport, segued into, Herm Lilly even remembers this. They hosted teen dances, and it was everybody was invited, and it probably didn't have any connection to the Finnish community except that it was at the Finn Hall. And you remember sort of a kid's dance, so that was sort of a transition point here. But going back again, before World War II, when the Finn halls everywhere were so much more robust, I look at that as the 20s and 30s, probably before World War I too. We're less familiar with pre-World War I. But what I mentioned before is that things we can't find here in archives or memories of what our grandparents or parents did in that time period, the height of the Finn halls, let's just put it that way, is that you can easily speculate that they were doing pretty close what other Finn towns were doing, because the halls had the signature, incredibly enough, for a small membership. When you just think about it, they had music, they had live musicians, live theater performers, live athletes, and then they had these programs of lectures and dances and all this sort of stuff, and then they would, their troops would go and do a play in Fitchburg, or in fact, didn't we meet somebody last Saturday who grew up in Fitchburg and remembers things, so these would, actually Fred Peterson remembers that basketball troops from Finn halls in the state would come here to play basketball. So they have these incredible connections, but the point I want to make is that you can expect that of the major 4 Finn halls that something like this robust, multifaceted activity was going on. So I mentioned before to all of you that my own background goes down to Norwood, where there was a significantly smaller community and one socialist, actually, Finn Hall. So one of my mother's better friends put together this entire book of essays and stories and programs. So I just looked up now, because this struck me as magical, really. There's not a date on it, but this is a program. I guess it was, here's the Finnish, and then here's the translation. So, and I bring this up because I think there were probably just dances, but I think that more often what they did was to have a rich program followed by a dance. And we're talking next year about, in that one, having Paul Nimstow band concert maybe. So it begins to echo. You had a multicultural program followed at the end, but the dance would be your. And it's interesting over there. They have the dance at midnight. It sort of followed other stuff. So even next year we might recreate some of that sense of a program followed by the dance. So this program, unfortunately there's no date on it, but it had the choir's grand concert and dance night. And it had 4 music selections by, again, the kids and the adults playing. Trombone music was another, one of those. A solo chorus, 3 songs from the chorus, a duet. Then they had, from the stage play, Song of the Times, some more music, but out of a play. And then they had a break. And then they had the Rukkanens and the Noppanens, a 1-act operetta, all this cast, and then dancing at the program's conclusion to the music of whatever. So it was kind of a rich program. Certainly the festivals, like at Hall in the Woods, would have been all day with different things, and then capped in the later evening by the dance. But there's a lovely essay, there's no date on this either, but Saturday Night Dance when I was 10 years old. If I could just read a little bit of it, because this is the kind of thing we love to try to do, is to evoke the people and how they were living and enjoying themselves and what kind of energy there was that was present in these events that we're trying to recreate on October 22nd. And next year we want the same level of joyfulness in this cultural event. So another Saturday night dance at the Finn Hall. A 3-piece orchestra is playing Finnish tunes and the floor is full of couples dancing. So she's 10. Whirling around and around, it's like a party every time there's a dance. She explains her father's gone to Detroit with the actors group. See?
Yeah.
Parent going off to Detroit with a theater group, whatever. So she's there with her dad. What fun it is to run up and down all the stairs, 2 sets of stairs. So, the first thing you grasp is that this was really kind of like an adult dance, but the kids were always invited there. And they're running up and down to the balcony. A curvy one to the balcony and a curvy one to the basement. The balcony has many rows of seats, and we can lift the sitting part up against the back so we can run back and forth between the rows when we play tag. If we knock over something, we won't be allowed to play in the balcony, whatever. Sometimes the kids just hang over the balcony wall to watch the old folks dance. We can see bald heads with the overhead lights shining down on them, and it's funny how short the people look. When music plays, everyone twirls around in one direction, so it is pretty to watch. Then the stairs to the basement go to where the food area is, and they and the orchestra takes a rest at 10 and has some foods. Then they open the little window behind a railing. The kids like to swing on that railing, and someone sells tickets for whatever the person wants to buy, and they go down to the act, whatever. But when the orchestra stops playing to get ready for the next 3 songs, all the kids get to run and slide on the floor from one end of the hall to the other. Oh, it is slippery. We have many spills, but no one gets hurt. Well, hardly ever. And we keep running and sliding until we're tired or the music starts up again. Then the old folks shoo us away. Sometimes, just like what you're remembering, Susie, sometimes we dance with each other in a corner, and sometimes with our mother or father. Dancing is fun. Sliding is better. This is like the voice coming out of the past and describing this multi-generational, just as part of a larger program, conceivably. The late at night, this is where we were talking about when to schedule this event. is the young kids stayed up very late to what was they understood to be their parents' event.
Yes.
But they were always welcome, and sometimes they danced with their parents and slid on the floor and watched from the balcony. And so I think we found this in the music and theater, that at that time, the adult performers and musicians always had young children right there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had them join the band, which is why they went on to such incredible music careers, because they were brought into music so young. And then in theater, the stories where they'd have the kids in the front row. This was partly how to give children the notion of the homeland and loyalty to the homeland, and partly so many of these were sort of peasantry, you know, rich landowner kind of dynamics of social histories and stuff, partly to bring kids into the politics and cultural dynamics of everything that they considered to be important. So I'm kind of assuming then, and it would be great if we could find more, like in the Gloucester Times or something, an actual program in a Finn hall where there was a dance. But I think it's probably fair to assume that it was intended to be a multi-generational, that it was all often accompanied by other program elements, and that, you know, that begins to capture some of the community gathering around culture, where the ultimate expression of the joyfulness and community was in those community dances. So anyway, we might try to use a little bit of the flavor of some of that,
Yeah.
even if we haven't been able to document, you know, what actually happened. So I would ask, you know, this is now going back to your grandparents, whether there's anything similar that you remember hearing about, which halls or how often or who was there, or anything from your back in that era of the 20s and 30s when the halls were the center. The halls were the organized center, as you put it. Or how we could find out more on this.
Boy, tough. It's tough.
We know that there were dances and programs, just as you have explained, at the Workers/Socialist Hall here in Lanesville, you know, corner of Tucker and Washington Street. And then I was wondering, were there dances at Wainola Hall? And it's interesting because when I talked with Sandra Sepala, you know, and her father, her grandfather, Charles Savinen, was very much involved with the Wainola Hall, as were many Finns. And he instructed with the athletics, Charlie. And when I asked her, Sandra, were there dances at the Temperance Hall? And she said, absolutely not. Okay? Absolutely not. And of course, then, because it burned down in 1945, there was no pressure to start either at that point. So then and of course, in the social Workers/Socialist Hall on Squam Road in Rockport, it was the same thing. My mother always used to talk about, you know, the Christmas parties and spring Juhannus and such, and there was a lot of dancing, and there was a lot of merriment, the poetry, kids had to perform, and all that. So we knew that it happens there. I'm not sure about the Vallonlamo. We know in the 50s it was dancing, but you know, we really haven't found out yet whether or not that was allowed. So in terms of the major halls, it was kind of a split in terms of dancing or not dancing.
I just want to say my uncle John Keelanen mentioned that the favorite place for him and his counterparts was the hall up on Squam Hill, which used to be the Tux Candy Factory building, because according to him, that was the best dance floor around.
Wow.
Yeah, it was right across Squam Hill Court from where my maternal grandparents lived.
right.
So my grandfather was part of the construction crew. You know, the Finns all got together after their hard day's work in the quarry and came with their tools and built those structures.
Oh, I was just going to say in reference to Wainola Hall, maybe my parents didn't dance there. I mean, I know my grandparents, I believe on both sides, were very active church people. And my grandmother Claymilla was head of the Temperance Society for many, many years. At one of the Fin Fests I went to in Maine a number of years ago, they actually had, I believe it was in Maine, anyway, they had, a display of all these photos from Lanesville and history and whatever. I don't even know who donated those or who set it up, but there is a picture of my grandmother and all the different, and history of the temperance and how many years she was. So I, like you just said, Sandra said she didn't think there was dancing, but I know the band rehearsed there because the Lutheran church at the time was on Norseman Avenue, right the next street over from where Wainola Hall was. And I know something that my Aunt Selma Claymla had said was that, because they were at the Wainola Hall a lot for other things with their mother, and they were upset there because they used to practice, the band sometimes practiced on Sunday mornings, and the church, people or whatever were upset because it disrupted the church service.
I just, my name is Donna Kylan and Shea, and I remember very vividly my mother and father dancing at the Wainola Hall.
Oh, okay.
Yes. As a matter of fact, my father told me a story once of the two of them being at Wainola Hall dancing, and my father, who wasn't a great dancer, really didn't like it, decided it was time to go home, but my mother said, no, I'm not going home. She loved to dance. So he up and left, and she spent the evening dancing with, all the other people there. So I know that they did dance at the Wainola Hall.
There you go. See?
No, they didn't, Donna. Here's another mystery to unearth. Okay. I wanted to mention that Sirka Tuami Home, there's a CD out about her life, and she lived, again, Tucker and High Street corner for about 6 years, and her dad was the mover and shaker for the Workers' Socialist Hall just down the street in the 20s. And when I interviewed Sirka, she mentioned that about all the merriment at the Workers' Hall, and that some of the children of the Temperance Society parents, they'd sneak out and join the merriment there at the Socialist Hall. And she said, including one of the minister's son. So some people knew where the action was and where the fun was.
So I wanted to ask you, Susie, we briefly mentioned it, but what is the name of the book that your mother, Lee Kingman Nettie, wrote about the mystery of the village band?
That was the Village Band Mystery.
Mystery, which I read all of, and I referred to that in the first music program of dances. I mean, music is everywhere, but I thought we could go back through. She didn't grow up here, was not Finnish, as I understand it, but she learned a great deal and probably wrote pretty accurately in her books. Do you think that she would have written about dance?
I don't recall that she mentions dance in that book, and I think she's remained very faithful to the stuff that my father told her. I know she describes the music at Wainola Hall, and other things. And I'm assuming that's all accurate because, I mean, she was really basing her information on what he was telling her. She wrote another book called The Rocky Summer, in which much of the sort of comic parts of the book are centered on a horse, which was actually based on an actual horse that my father bought. And I know from letters that he wrote to her during World War II that almost every anecdote that shows up on that book about this horse is exactly what he told her. So I'm going to base my best guess on the information she put in the Village Van Mystery, that was what my father related to her.
Well, I have the book and I don't know where I put it, but I thought that's something to try to do. Look
Sure.
at.
Yeah. I can put my hand on that.
Yeah, good. That would be great. 'Cause that's great you say. It was really, really accurate. Which
Great.
you did.
Wasn't that her first book?
Village Van Mystery, no, but The Rocky Summer was one of her first books.
That's what I meant.
There was the first book based on Cape Ann. And it was the other interesting thing about it was that she talked about the dynamics between Annisquam and Lanesville, which was definitely a sort of class thing. Yeah.
I love that book. Excuse me, I love that book.
Oh, good.
I do have it, yeah.
Well, you know, one other question that came up, a few of us went to hear Les Bartlett talk yesterday. He described some of the worker issues around the quarries. And Rob and I were talking after that, like, because Les didn't really get into it, but a lot of the workers in the quarries were itinerant. Maybe he said 70% would come. They'd work in Bar, Vermont and around about, get the best price per hour, and so then they'd show up. And in the music program a few years ago, we included lyrics from this dishwasher's polka, which was a domestic girl who would work all day in somebody's house and then go to the dance that night. And, you know, so now I'm wondering, like, well, gee, did these workers go to these dances and dance with the local girls? And I mean, you know, again, there's so much that we don't really understand about who was here and what they were doing and how much a dance was a part of that. But I think the other thing that we were reflecting that Circa mentioned is Les talked about how at some point they were working 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. Eventually they went to 10. But what Circa said is that her father would work in the quarries, long, hard day, go right down after supper to that hall and rehearse for plays and stuff until midnight or 1 in the morning. Just an incredible amount of energy they had, but the commitment that they had to the hall and the cultural events that they all did together is really pretty remarkable. And that's sort of that relationship in the Dishwasher's polka lyrics that are in that music program is the same sort of thing of working all day, and then the nighttime was for this real cultural explosion of energy and camaraderie and stuff like that Circa talks about as well.
Senior moment. Oh boy. It has to do with Circa, but I'm going to hand this back because by the time I do, I'll remember. Sorry.
Well, can I ask you, Betty, what you were describing before the meeting started, you know, the library down on microfiche, and also now I believe all of those issues are up on the internet to access, but Lanesville and Pigeon Cove had, at least weekly, I think, columns that were in the newspaper. And so I went through about a week in 1923. It was really great to read the Lanesville column. It was so personal. It would be, so-and-sos have arrived for the summer and had dinner with really okay. And then the most lovely thing that we used for the first May Day History Festival so this would have been early May, the profusion of blueberry buds in the wild suggests a plentiful year. And so we know that this is the time of year when they would have been, you know, enjoying blueberry cake and soup and all that sort of stuff. But I think there's a wealth of information in those columns. If they were writing about so-and-so as a
Yeah.
summer.
Well, they were all given to the Cape Ann Museum, so they're probably in the process of looking at all of those and trying to organize them into various subjects.
Well, maybe there's somebody down there, but if you follow what I'm saying is that, and I believe that Annisquam had their own column, and I think Pigeon Cove did too, as well as maybe Magnolia, but that,
Lanesville.
yeah, Lanesville did, that's what I'm saying, Lanesville. And those are the ones that I was reading. And I do believe that if we got a student or somebody to really go through those systematically, that there's a wealth of mentions of dances and which halls they were and whether they were part of a program. The reason I went for that week is that Les Bartlett had gotten me onto, in 1923, was a celebration of the ending of a year-long strike. And so there's a description of the paper, of the lecture, poetry, the same sort of thing of the celebration evening was a program plus, I believe, probably, you have to look back at it, but I believe they also went into the dance at the end, which was the final exuberant celebration they had. But it's more a question of, do we have the time to go through those columns and find out more about where and how often and what kind of descriptions there are of dances. The other archival resource is the Finnish newspapers out in Michigan and also in Fitchburg. There was one, and my uncle Lowry was married to Elsie. he was a correspondent for one of the Finnish newspapers out in the Midwest, and so he would have been writing. What these correspondents did was they would write into the national newspaper what was going on in their Finn town, and I'm convinced that they're translating from Finnish back in those years into English, but that if we had someone with the time to go through the news that was submitted from Lanesville and Rockport to those newspapers, we would also learn a great deal about the kinds of events that they were holding during that time period before World War II that I'm describing. So, and this is something, Susie, I think, if we could just get a student or something, to spend some time, there's a lot of rich information here in our own newspaper and also in these national Finnish newspapers.
I remember. And we were talking about Sitka, and how did they do it? There's only so much time in the day, be in the hall and be at work, maybe time to eat a little. Sitka said that her dad worked in the quarries when they were here, but the day ended at 3 p.m. so that they had a little time to catch a breath and then off to the hall. It doesn't mean that at the end of the day they're not exhausted, but if you have visions, they come home at 6, the guys, and they bolt down a meal and then go off to the hall. No, they did have a little time in between.
So did they start work at 5?
I have no idea. But that was her remembered. She was only 99 when she was relating these stories. But I hope I know I won't have her memory when I'm 99.
Well, so, going back to the archival, I will tell you, we're sort of throwing it out here, is that we could access a lot of information. And I think if you went through the columns for Lanesville and Pigeon Cove, you'd find a lot about theater. It would not just be the dance. You'd find out a lot about how they were spending their time and what stories were happening. But there's one thing that I would love to have a photo or a little description of is, so they get on the bus. That's just great. You were there, you saw the big bus come, and they got on the bus.
I don't know why I've stored that in my mind.
Well, it was a big deal. It really was. They were going to dance at Constitution Hall. So I did a little search of Constitution Hall, Cape Ann. I couldn't come up with anything, but I'm convinced that somewhere in Washington, D.C., there's archival material. I've wondered things like, were they one dance out of a whole program? Were they an entire dance of Finnish, an entire evening? And to me, it's just a lovely, it captures so many things that they were, this community was in so many ways so isolated and interior. Memories of our last meeting that some girl was 12 before she went to downtown Gloucester. Yeah. So, but at the same time, what most people around here do not know is how connected they were to the outside world, the Finnish American world largely. But the fact that they would take, it's just typical that they'd go to DC and do their dances, and who would ever know? It's just, it captures some of this worldliness that they had. They had an image of isolation and ignorance or something, when in fact, through the connections with the Finn halls and taking their plays and their sports and their music and their dance, they were quite worldly. And so I'd love to see if somebody, you mentioned you know someone in DC who's a member who of Cape Ann Friends.
Not in DC. It alludes to what we were just talking about. Cape Ann Finn's got a grant award to to have some of the Cape Ann news in the Raivaja translated from Finnish into English. And so this is what Valerie is alluding to. We can go to English-written newspapers from the past and pull out information too. That the woman who's translating the information is in D.C. That's the connection.
Oh,
But
well,
she
I
got
have
a Cape
images
Ann
of her.
Finn.
She's going to go to Constitution Hall and say,
Right.
"Can you find?" Yeah. Do you have any ideas, Betty, for how to access these
No, I
newspaper
don't.
archives or anything?
No, and as I was saying, at the time I was probably in high school, so I was interested in academics and my friends and record hops, and I was not interested in Finnish dancing at the time, so I don't have an idea really, but maybe I'll give it some thought. I might come up with something.
How much do you think Barbara or those archives at now at the museum might have around dance photos or?
Do you know, John?
I can't notice it. Can't think of anything.
Yeah.
Did your mom and dad, were they part of the Finnish dancers?
No, they were younger, I think, because my mother is not Finnish, but that's all right.
I don't know if anyone would offer. Well, one image I have is how many of us wish that our mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers were sitting here so we could finally ask them all the things that we never asked them.
Well, see, my mother used to tell stories all the time too, and my mother unfortunately passed away.
My mother used to tell stories all the time too, to me, just about everything, her life in general and whatever. And unfortunately, my mother passed away in 1978, and she was only 59 at the time. And so at that time, I really wasn't that interested in my Finnish culture. Even though I grew up in Lazel, I love nature, I have all those genes, those Finnish genes that I really never knew were Finnish genes. My love of nature and just whatever. But like Betty said too, high school year she wasn't interested. I wasn't really interested, and it really didn't come until after my children were. Well, probably I went to Finland in 1995, so I know that was before that I joined Spiron, and I escalated into really being interested in my Finnish culture, unfortunately, like so many of us.
Well, I guess what I'm gearing up for is I wonder if, so I really had so much joy out of reading Well, there was the other thing in 1923 in the Gloucester Times. The mayor went to plead for money for the fishing industry. It was like that could have been in today's paper. It was like 1923.
Exactly.
Met with the congressman, got to. I mean, it was just like same thing. They wanted federal money to do marketing of fish in Ohio. I mean, same thing. So it was a joyful experience to read 1 week's worth. I just wonder if anyone else is interested in. I bet if we could try to go into a year like 1932.
I would love to do that. I mean, I'm an archive hound.
If I would, for me, this would be a great winter project. I'm not committing to doing all of this research before October 22nd. But I mean, this is just exactly the kind of stuff I love to do. So, yeah.
Oh, it's so rewarding.
It is
One
absolutely.
of the things I felt about that, which has kept with me, other than, you mentioned the jeans or something, I mean the blueberries, the attachment to blueberries, which are not there anymore, you know, because we've let Dogtown go. But there's a freshness and an openness, just a loveliness of language of this couple has arrived and we had dinner and the blueberries in the weald and they come across as just so friendly and open and sincere and not angry and all the stuff.
We're all happy. Yeah, happy.
I think all those Lanesville columns, I can vaguely remember, reading those and whatever, but and the different villages on Cape Ann, but they were all like happy, nice stories, not angry, frustrated,
And friendly.
yes.
And neighborly.
Yes.
And they noticed that they had just arrived.
Exactly, yep.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how do you know any of the names of the people other than ones Betty mentioned who were part of that Cape Ann Finns dance group? The names of the people.
Silo and Ellis Urkala, Bob and Betty Graham, my mother and father, Rachel and Matt Keelan, Fred and Fanny Jacobson. I can't think of it.
Doris and Anna, were they?
Doris and Ano Klamala, right. They were in that.
Yeah,
I would say that if I could just, in talking to Sarah Slivers, so again, the Finnish American dance traditions here, that's one first of her efforts to learn about and recreate and celebrate that. But in talking to her, and then she hopefully goes along with Portuguese and Brazilian and some others, but she's also really interested in this question of how important to society these community activities and how much cultural activities strengthen the communities and their abilities to look out for each other and to do things together, and that one of the losses of participatory community cultural events like this is a loss in the cohesion
right.
in the culture, and whether there are lessons for us going forward who might want to rebuild that spirit and energy around getting to know each other better in a positive way and not in angry ways. I don't, you know, this is something you think about, Susie, of the museum and all that.
Well, as you were speaking, Val, I thought that one central core of that is the multi-generational aspect of it. Yeah.
Well, and then we certainly said this in our earlier programs, is that the Finns, I don't know, they were isolated from Finland, but here they were very open and encouraging of other ethnic groups to come into their bands and probably come to their dances as well. Is that they were multi-generational and very open to other immigrant groups. I don't know, is that, you have any recollections from Rockport or anything about it?
who came to these events? Was it just Finns or were other neighbors?
I wasn't really paying attention.
I know,
So, yeah.
our generation.
Again, this is just a guess. I would imagine that the Finnish community was just that because of the common language, so that most of the people, unless they had the younger ones, like our parents, had boyfriends and girlfriends who were not Finnish. Other than that, my sense is that that's why they had these gatherings, because they could communicate where they couldn't down in Gloucester, something like that.
But if you, in the music, they definitely, if you look at the names of who were in some of these bands, it's not just Finnish people. I think they did, right, so they did, and then eventually Finns became part of the bands that played at dances around. My understanding is that some of the bands out of here were, as I think I said earlier, were really major dance musicians for all of Cape Ann. So they had this, I mean, I think that's important to us too, that, you know, that we don't have to isolate ourselves into us versus immigrants or whatever, you know, that there was an impulse. And in fact, I think, you know, in some ways that even came out of the Sibelius Finlandia lyrics of my home, my country, my home, but also in other lands, in other be peace. And so there's something in that, I think, generosity of other kinds of people sharing and you know, whatever. So that's another thing. Who went, in the 20s and 30s, who went to the dances and how open were they?
I was gonna just, that brought up a memory too. Some of you may know Louise Ferrazzi. She was a Landoni, and my mother was born in 1918. So at some point, Louise Landoni's family, my mother's family, my mother grew up on Leverett Street in Lanesville, and Louise is a friend of mine, and her family lived up Leverett Street at some point when she was a child, and she has, this isn't about dances or anything, but she has fond memories of the Claymore family, and, you know, and kind of hanging out, you know, as a young child. And I actually have a couple of pictures. I think it's her sister, Esther Landoni, with some of a couple of Claymores, and her brother, Bob Landoni, is a musician who has played often at Spirun in a group. So I know they were really, you know, friends of Italian heritage.
There you go.
Yeah.
I also recall, I digress a little bit here, but we had record hops up at the Congregational Church in the vestry when I was probably, must have been mid-50s, early 50s, which were such, do you remember them, Nancy?
I do remember.
Yeah, which were really fun. I mean, the whole community came of that age block. But it was one of the most fun that I had as a teenager, going to those record hops at the Congregational Church.
While you have the mic in your hand, how about the names of some of the bands, the dance bands?
Oh,
How about your uncle?
my uncle Julius,
Yeah.
yes,
He had
he was in several bands here.
had his
He
own-
played with Sylvester Ahola, I should say, and I was at the age where I wasn't that terribly interested in what he was doing at that point. Silly me, but he was pretty well known around here as a musician, and And he didn't keep it up very long. I think just while he was in Lanesville that he did it. I don't remember him playing any music after that. But he was quite a musician.
He did have a dance band.
He did have a dance band?
Yeah, I
Thank
have
you,
a
Robert.
photo, and it just says Julius on the, we put the music.
Mm-hmm.
They had not just the thin bandstands, but like a box, and it said Julius, and it was right there.
Oh, my gosh. Well, thank you. As I said, I wasn't that interested at that point in time, so it didn't leave any memories in my mind. But yes, he was quite a musician.
Anyone else remember names of dance bands? Yeah. We mentioned one earlier, and that was Vern Nami's band. Vern Nami, Stephen's dad, had a dance band for a good number of years. And they played, as you've said earlier, at the Roundtable, but all over the North Shore. And then finally, the Hendricks and Family Band from Rockport. They played all over the place too for dances as well, and there may be many other groups, but those are the three that I recall.
What I remember is I was in the Rockport High School band, and because I was having orthodontia work done, I couldn't play an instrument by mouth, so I played the glockenspiel. They hadn't had that for quite a while. But the first year I was in the band, Vern Nami was the director. And then at a later time, I can't remember if it was the second year or third year or what, it was another musician, Andrew Jacobson. He was the director.
I think Andy had a band too, but he was so versatile, he was all over the place. But if he didn't play in them, he had one for a time. We'll have to check with Muriel.
One thing to add, by the way, and Susie, in terms of your offer, is that we finally looked back at the Finlandia Foundation grant. So we have until end of April on our end to what we've asked for before for funding is to have a celebration, a recreation, and also a prompt for us to do as much archival research to go from that foggy into more and more clarity of what actually happened here. So we do have until the end of April to assemble more. So we can come up with some kind of program by October 22nd and then plan on
And I can talk more about it.
yeah, how to do that, and then maybe something of some of the other Finnish newspapers. This woman who's doing translations, how can she help us access the Lanesville and Pigeon Cove submissions?
Okay.
You wanna?
Yeah, I'll give her a call. But the way it works is that I've been the Raivaya people. There's a trustee group. They sent the complete Raivaya digitized, and so in terms of using
And that's the newspaper, can you just explain that a little bit?
the Raivaya was for many years until I think the 1960s, from maybe 1904 to the 1960s, a Finnish newspaper, and the Finnish communities throughout Massachusetts would contribute a column or information about goings on in Rockport and Gloucester or Lanesville sometime listed. And of course it's in Finnish. So this is the logistics, but in terms of getting the best out of the grant money, I have been going through all of them and then finding Lanesville or finding Rockport and then sending it to the woman, because if she did it, all the money would go for searching for the columns. So it's going along, but again, not as fast as we'd like to be.
You can't read the Finnish,
Right.
but you can see Lanesville and Rockport.
Correct.
So she's already picked up, she already has the ones that we care about.
Yeah.
So when will these be available?
I don't know. I think I started around the 1930s, not the 20s, but I can go there.
Maybe she could send us a few years in the 30s.
Yeah.
What those columns
Right.
had in them.
And also, isn't the Gloucester Daily Times digitized now?
Yes,
Okay, so can you work from home?
yeah, you can do this from home. No, but are you saying that this woman in DC who you had grant money to do some translations and you narrowed it down to the Lanesville Rockport columns, well, if she's been doing it, she sent it to us right away.
I'll ask her.
Ask her. Jeez, okay. This is what we were
Yeah,
hoping
we
at
all-
the meeting is we
yeah.
trigger these things like, oh, we could do that.
You know how we all have our list?
Yeah.
That's what she's done.
Oh, no, she goes right to the top, Rob. Great. I wonder who and even finding out who the correspondents were
Yeah.
would be fun to see the names of, who was on there. You have any memories you want to add that have been provoked by this discussion? Or thoughts about what everyone was saying?
Nikki Korkati, Nikikorkatti. I grew up in Bayview, so we really weren't a part of the Lanesville community. Also, I didn't join the Lutheran Church until we were older. The kids in Bayview went to the Methodist Church because we could walk to it. And I do remember going to the Brotherhood Club, but it was mostly pie socials. Maybe they were doing dancing as well. But I do remember, I think maybe in the 70s or 80s, they used to have a folk festival. Do you remember that in Gloucester? And it was fabulous, and they had dancing from all over the world. So everyone was very interested in the Nordic dancing. That's why we all went, and it was, great fun.
Were they dressed in costume?
Yes, everyone was in costume.
And where were those dancers from? Do you remember?
I think they were all from Gloucester because they had Portuguese dancing, Italian, and
Really?
yeah, it was at the O'Malley. Do you remember going
I've
there?
been there many times, but I haven't connected any Finnish dancing locally there.
Yeah, so we went, particularly for the dances there. Do you remember that? Yeah.
That's something to look
Yeah, they were
for.
great. They were absolutely fabulous. Everyone looked forward to it, and then they just stopped them for some reason.
Was it the 1950s, 1960s?
No.
No, I think it was like
80s.
yeah, 70s or 80s.
Wow, I had no idea.
They were at the O'Malley School, and it was all day long, and they had rooms set aside.
Right.
And lots of food you could have there.
Right,
And
from
it
all
was
over the
great.
world.
It was, it was the Gloucester Folk Festival.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it went year after year after year, and it was,
Wow.
a signature event. I would say it's worth trying to find out. The museum probably has these programs.
They probably have that because I remember Al
That was a
Sarapak
that was a
used to
big
do the
yearly
wood
event.
carving every year for the
Folk Festival was
posters.
a huge event,
Yeah.
lots and lots of people went. But my recollection is that a lot of those dancers, I mostly remember sort of like maybe Greek dancers in costumes,
Oh.
as that they were from out of town.
Yeah.
So
I don't remember that, but I know that they were the Nordic dances from around here.
around here.
Probably the Swedish, I don't know.
Interesting to find out who was doing it. It might be in the museum archive.
Yeah.
Or if you ask almost anyone, 80s,
Yeah.
early 90s, it was quite a core group that
Yeah.
did it every year, and they must have the programs for who was. And this is why partly we're hoping still next year, Rob is trying to arrange the Saturday of the Fin Fund would be at O'Malley School. It's an excellent layout.
Mm.
It has the auditorium and the gym and all the classrooms and the central lobby and the cafeteria. It's just a wonderful mixing place. Did you go to those every year?
I don't remember a lot except I like them.
Like them, yeah.
And I do remember going to the Rockport Art Association for the square dancing and all different types of dances there as well. And they actually had an Ipswich, and when as well they would have a 1 week in Rockport and 1 week in Ipswich. And when my cousin came here from Finland, I brought him to it in Ipswich to see if he, wanted to learn the contra square dancing and stuff. And he mentioned that, it was very similar to what they did in Finland.
Bill?
Yeah, no, I think if we could, that would be something pretty interesting to see if, I think we're identifying on, maybe it was down in Millbrook too that they did some dances, but up on the hill around the maypole. Sort of the last kind of real expressions, and it could be the Folklife Festival was another place where it kind of, there was some continuation on, and somewhere in there, other than the private home reunions and weddings and things like that, there wasn't any kind of organized. So that comes to my mind as something to try to find those Folklife Festival programs, and who from here was doing that Nordic dancing. That would be really interesting to find out. You have a gold mine of potential information, and you weren't even, it was down at the bottom of your list.
Right. It's time for us to wind down.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'll give the mic back to you because
Oh, no,
there
I'm
are two of
sorry.
us who haven't given our names.
Oh, well, you know what my name is, you could put me down there. Yeah, so thank you. And any ideas or things you remember afterwards, or people that we should be talking to? One thing is, which I mentioned at the beginning, on October 22nd, they'll be filming some of the dancing, but they hope at that event to interview a few people. So if you, somebody mentioned someone, and I wrote a few notes, who's still alive, who did a lot of the Flossie maybe or something.
Oh, Flossie, yeah, Flossie, yeah.
So
She
if,
taught dancing.
She'd be a good
She
one to
taught
contact.
dancing for
yeah,
years and years.
to talk to with the
Yeah.
dances happening behind there, and to talk to there. And then I guess the other plea would be, it's at City Hall on October 22nd, and I said to Rob, maybe 25 people will show up, really. And then it's nothing like the old days, so we have to all work really hard to be there, try to get kids and grandkids there so we can recreate the energy around the multi-generational and bring non-Finns too. That's all part of the exuberance of
Absolutely.
the openness, multi-generational, multicultural, and having a great time. So
We'd like the Finns to outnumber the non.
Right, exactly.
right. All right, so thank you very much. And
Thank you, then.
yeah, it's been great fun. I knew that if you came, you'd enjoy it, right? That's what I said. Thank you all.